Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand. I am your host for today, Matt Seitz, Chief Marketing Officer here at C2P. And we have a very special guest today, our founder and CEO, Jason L. Smith. Jason's one of our resident SMEs on today's topic, optimizing your firm with an accountability chart. For those that aren't familiar, an accountability chart, one of those key tools from EOS, as a reminder, that's Entrepreneurial Operating System, one of those that helps your business streamline and simplify your team structure. We follow that both at JL Smith and C2P. Many of you heard us talk about this before, and ours in particular obviously led at the top from Jason. So what better source to turn to for expertise on that when Jason today. So Jason, thank you for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm honored to be a guest, Matt.
I know it's fun to turn the tables like this.
Right?
So we can look at it as co-hosts for today.
No, it's all good.
I guess to set the table for that, for those that haven't heard where we're at, how we use this, our experience with this at both companies. For those that aren't familiar, can you briefly explain what an accountability chart is and what its purpose is?
Yeah, I'm going to give a long explanation because I think it's worthy of it. Matt, years ago, I was first introduced in business many years ago. It's hard to believe I started in 95, 30 years, man, crazy. And I just remember learning about an org chart, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, it's who does what and who reports to who. And then probably 20 years ago, I learned about E-Myth, right? And I read the book, E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And I actually joined his coaching program, learned a ton, especially because I never went to college and didn't have any formal business education. So E-Myth provided that pretty intense program where we had multiple hours of homework every week, weekly coaching calls. That was the structure many years ago. I don't know what it is today, but they taught me all the basics, how to forecast, how to build a budget, how to build an org chart, but they had a different spin on it, right? They had these things and they called them position agreements. And we've evolved a little, made it a little bit our own kind of method, but these position agreements, what they said is this needs to be very clear on, what that person is accountable for, but it was still an org chart of who they reported to. And then over time, what I started realizing in my own practice, which led to something we still use today, responsibility agreements, is I started being like, man, in a small business, a lot of people wear multiple hats, right? Or they fill multiple roles or boxes on an org chart, right? So you report to this person here and this person here, and I report to myself here, and it's, oh my gosh. And it became apparent that, hey, why don't we unbundle a position agreement and create these responsibility agreements? And the responsibility agreements are all the different hats that that person wears. I might be accountable for being a financial advisor, right, within the organization of closing sales, especially if I'm first chair, the sales portion of the team, and say I have a second chair that's more service oriented. So I might be accountable for that. But hey, I might also, in a small company, I might own the marketing seat too. I might be responsible and accountable for making sure lead generation happens. And oh, by the way, I'm a pretty small business, right? Which I was years ago. I might also be accountable for business development, lead conversion, of who's going to actually convert those leads onto the advisor's calendar. And then as an advisor, I'm responsible for closing them on becoming a client. And I might outsource finance. And so but at the end of the day, I might also, so even just in that example of me being an advisor, owning marketing, owning business development, maybe I have another team member who owns operations, but I might hold 3 major roles or seats within the organization in that example. But we found it very difficult on an org chart to represent that. So we created these responsibility agreements. And so there's 20 of them that we've identified in a financial services practice: new business processing and status, case prep and post appointment, on to the marketing and business development, operations, finance, taxes, all the different things that need to happen in a firm. And those, each one of those are a responsibility agreement. But then we said, okay, there's a position contract, meaning that you are going to be the one that owns that set of responsibility agreements. And an org chart is different than an accountability chart, because an accountability chart is really all the responsibility agreements listed and who owns which one. So it's clear who's accountable for the results, for the KPIs within that responsibility agreement. Outlines what you're responsible for, right? Whatever those things in those 20 different responsibility agreements that we've identified in every financial services practice. These exist. Honestly, most businesses, they all exist. Small tweaks just for financial services. But at the end of the day, like, every one of those 20 have to be on the board, and then somebody's name has to be on each one. Who's accountable for, like, the key performance indicators within that responsibility agreement? So an accountability chart is really all the different responsibility agreements, right, which are unbundled off of a person. So that way you can move it around as time goes on. There's general categorization of marketing, of business development, of financial services, of operations, of HR, finance, right? So, like, under the umbrella on an accountability chart, you have these major functions of a team. But separately, like, an org chart is very different. An org chart is like who reports to who, right? Who is reporting to who? So I would say, if you take these responsibility agreements, and Matt, if you have 5 of them and I have 3 of them, that's our position contracts, right? And you can show on an org chart who reports to who, but it's not going to clearly, like, unbundle and clearly delineate the difference of the responsibility agreements, that people are accountable for the KPIs. And I learned that through eMyth. I learned about the idea of kind of these position contracts, led to building out these responsibility agreements. And then it had a massive aha moment when I was introduced to EOS and the idea of the accountability chart. Because eMyth, all the time, I'm like, I don't understand, because, like, my position agreement has marketing, business development, financial services. Heck, I even oversee the finance lane. It's all jumbled up into my position agreement. In versus, like, when we unbundled those into responsibility agreements, they're like the building blocks that create a position contract. And a position contract is like, this is what I own, right? As an individual, this is what I own. These are all my responsibility agreements that I own. And then I can plug that into an org chart. The position contracts going into an org chart of who reports to who. Responsibility agreements get all unbundled and laid out with a name of each person who's responsible for each one of those responsibility agreements. So yeah, it was like a little bit of EOS gave the idea of these responsibility agreements. And then EOS, or that was eMyth, I'm sorry. And then EOS was like really what gave the clarity of, an accountability chart showing who's accountable for what.
Yeah, and it ties right into what you talk about in the teamwork movement too, like the trading cards. It makes it clear of, like, how many are you holding and how you can easily pass between them and make it very transparent.
Yeah, the cards everybody loves, because we've created a responsibility agreement, which is like a document that lists out the strategic work, the tactical work, the result statement of what that person's accountable for. That's what is within a responsibility agreement. But what's been really nice is people were like, man, this is overwhelming, because these are robust and you got to go through and you got to edit them and make them customized to your firm. 90%'s there, but the last 10% you want to customize to your firm. But sometimes got a little overwhelming. What was cool is, and Gina Pellegrini and I wrote a book together called, she's a coach at Strategic Coach and a business partner at C2P. And her and I wrote the book, The Hiring Advantage, which is how to hire, onboard, and train a staff member. And when we did that, we came up with this idea of, man, It'd be cool to build a deck of cards, right, that have each responsibility agreement on it. It has the result statement and just some bullet points of the major functions that if you have that responsibility agreement, what you're accountable for. And honestly, it served us so well, Matt, because when we hire a new person, especially this is what we used to do years ago when we had a small firm at JL Smith. We hire a new person, we would sit down as a team, 4 or 5 of us, and we'd say, okay, who holds what responsibility agreement? Now, this new hire that we're going to hire, what responsibility agreements do we want to shed off of us and reallocate to the new hire? Then we would take those responsibility agreements, and that's how we'd create the job description. And so when they came on board, they knew they got those decks out of those cards out of the deck. But it was very clear and transparent for everybody on the team. And what it really guarded against, Matt, which I used to be the worst at this, and a lot of small kind of entrepreneurial financial advisors are really bad at this, is it's called drive-by delegation. And so it's whoever's closest to you, just whatever you need done as the entrepreneur, and they scramble and go figure out how to do it. But when you have clear delineation of who's responsible and who's accountable for what, it empowers them to be like, oh, do you want me to let Susie know? You know what I mean? They're not going to go back to you and be like, well, yourself or tell Susie. But they can be like, all right, I'll let Susie know. And then it almost gives your team the ability to train you a little bit and redirect traffic to the right people. And it's just very clear, right, of who does what.
Yeah, they know who to go to. So that makes a lot of sense. And obviously the difference between accountability chart, org chart, as we transition to C2P or over at JL Smith, is there anything that you thought with that transition was difficult for any team members? Like any adjustments from going from an org chart to an accountability chart that was maybe more difficult to follow or to grasp?
Yeah, I think it was very confusing for all of us, including myself, for many years of it took a while to really understand the difference of the two. And most people are this way when they start adopting EOS. They think of an accountability chart like an org chart, and it gets very confusing. And I think it is just difficult in general if you think of it as an org chart. But if everybody gets on the same page from the beginning of here's this deck of cards of all these responsibility agreements, or here are all these responsibility agreements, who is going to do which one, right? That when you combine and I take these 5 or you take these 7 and she takes these 3, now we have everybody's accountable for each responsibility agreement. But then, and some might be outsourced, right? You might outsource too, but it's very clear. And now you have a position contract that then goes to a traditional org chart, which we don't even barely look at. Everybody knows who their manager is. The org chart is nowhere near as helpful. It's for like giant organizations that you need to remember who's reporting to who or what. For the most part, it's pretty intuitive, but the responsibility agreements have been really the game changer of the clarity of everybody internally of who is responsible and accountable for what and what results. I think the difficulty that I've seen other people have with it is people being like scared to let go of things because they feel like they're going to be replaced or they feel like they're not going to be as valuable. So they want to try to protect a lot of stuff that they're doing. And honestly, that's been a bottleneck for a lot of firms that I consult on growth is they try to hold on to too much and because they feel like that's the perceived value, right? Or the value they bring. So they don't want to shed responsibility agreements to delegate to new team members coming on board. So I think that's probably been the reoccurring theme that I've seen pop up most.
Yeah. And the other one I've seen too, and in fact, you and I think we were talking about this earlier today, when something's outsourced, like we have our marketing agency, which some of our offices tap into, someone in that firm still has to own that box. Or if you are outsourcing bookkeeping or HR or any of those, still having someone still accountable for it, even though it's being outsourced externally.
Yes, absolutely, man. I'm so glad you brought this up. Is like at the end of the day, you can delegate responsibility, but ultimately somebody's accountable, right? And that is where even the structure of an accountability chart with all the responsibility agreements, all the seats on there of the major responsibilities is important because it does similar to an org chart. There's a roll up, right? And at the top, you have to know who's accountable for what. And then going layers down, if you're a large organization, every manager needs to understand who is accountable for what. But when I say you can delegate responsibility versus accountability, is I might say to my son, Wyatt, you are accountable for taking the trash out every week. No matter what, you got to walk around to each one of the garbage bags and you got to put them into the garbage bag in the garage. And then Phil, our farm manager, can come over with the giant tractor and take it a half mile down the driveway to put by the street. He's not old enough for that yet at 9 years old.
Not yet.
Yeah, he'll be driving that tractor one day. So for now, that's Phil. Definitely not me. So, anyways, I can assign accountability to Wyatt, right? Now, Wyatt can absolutely say, hey, to his little brother Lincoln and his little sister Lennon, hey, help me out. I'm going to give each one of you $1, right? If you help me out and you go empty these 5 and Lennon, you go empty these 6. I have too many trash cans in my house. But at the end of the day, what Wyatt can't do is come back when the trash is gone the next morning. We come back home and it's stinky in one of the bathrooms because nobody emptied the trash, right? And I go to Wyatt and he can be like, Lincoln, I paid Lincoln $1. He missed it. You know what? You're accountable, Wyatt. You are accountable for this, not Lincoln. I didn't make Lincoln accountable. I made you accountable for this trash. So that's a difference. Like he can delegate, he can outsource, he can pay, right, for a responsibility to get done. But there's an accountability, right?
Yeah, and I think that helps. I guess the next question, which you already touched on, something you cover in the teamwork movement, especially the evolution of the teamwork movement of late. So the plug too for those that haven't been through it recently of walking each of our advisors through lane by lane how we unbundled each role and how it's not just the one box at the top, but each role underneath. Can you talk through how we landed on that and how we work through that in the teamwork movement of how each lane structure was broken out?
Yeah, it's funny. Like the teamwork movement did start out. It was actually, we just had it named Advisor Career Path and Compensation. And then we got most of our advisors all through that. And a lot of them adopted it and have been doing great switching over that the way that they compensate advisors internally and the way they put 5-rung career path of you can hire people right in as a CSA and then they can work their way up to a paraplanner, then work their way up to an associate or service advisor, and then even work their way up to a lead advisor, and then maybe even work their way up to a practicing partner that's an equity stakeholder in the firm. Or you could hire them right in at paraplanner, right? Or you could hire them right in at, more of a service or associate advisor to work their way straight up from there. But like having that clarity on a career path and how to compensate everyone using benchmark studies, layering in incentive compensation, getting off of the grid, where as a business owner, you lose control of your profitability really when you have your advisors on the grid. That was a huge evolution and breakthrough. But then what we found is over and over again, we're getting questions asked about marketing, lead generation, about business development, lead conversion, about the financial services lane and the delineation of the backstage, the CSAs and paraplanners versus the front stage, advisors, lead advisors, practicing partners, who does what within there, about our platform, which is our offering of what we offer to clients on the insurance side, on the investment side, on the annuity side, what our pricing structure is, how much we charge for planning fees, for tax work, for AUM fees, depending on household size. Do you account for a annuity business? And when you're doing your pricing, so many questions. And then it was so much EOS. They're asking about an accountability chart, building a scorecard to review with your team on a weekly basis of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, and the difference of leading indicators versus lagging indicators, and what are the most important things to keep a close eye on in your business, and how do you conduct a really powerful 90-minute meeting per week, and how do you set goals and forecast effectively, and the different types of incentive comp, whether it be a monthly sales bonus or a quarterly bonus based on the profitability of the firm. All these different things just kept coming up, and we're like, all right, tear this thing down and let's rebuild it, right? So we tore advisor career path and comp down and rebuilt it into the teamwork movement. And now what it really is, it's a tour of the whole accountability chart and the most important tools that we've developed, checklists, processes, just a whole tour of the accountability chart, how we run our practice to optimize efficiency and profitability and give clarity to all the team members and give them the best support to continue to grow within their role, to be better and better at the job that they do. Really, at the end of the day, like, your key to being a successful business owner is to attract, retain, and reward top talent. And you got to have a well-oiled machine to attract, and you got to compensate correctly. You got to retain them. You have to have, especially a rock star, they're asked to have the ability to earn equity into the future with your firm. And that's a big part of the reward in how you retain and how you reward. And so incentive compensation is a big part of that reward. So at the end of the day, in order to scale your business up, in order to maximize valuation of your firm, in order to have the best levels of profitability, and in order to have happy employees, which are going to equal happy clients, you have to give clarity and structure and a clear path on how people can succeed within your organization. That's what the teamwork movement has evolved into. We'll review platform, and we'll bring Brian Bibbo, who's accountable for platform, to come in and talk about our offerings. We'll review business development, marketing that you're going to talk about and cover, that you're really accountable for the results in those areas. And Rob Lasivita, who's accountable for financial services and how he runs, the backstage versus the front stage team members, and what success criteria they have and how they can work their way up in those 5 rungs of the advisor career path. And then Kelly's going to come in and talk about HR and financing and how we compensate our people and what bonus structures and monthly sales bonus and incentive compensation and all that good stuff, and how we build our budgets and forecast, and what our scorecard looks like of the most important things. We always keep our eye on the ball. And then people are going to walk away and be completely blown away. And they're going to be able to implement about 10 to 20% of what they learn, because they're going to have learned so much, but then they continue to come back and they keep cherry picking the most important tools and the most important concepts and ideas and checklists or processes, and plugging into our e-learnings that support all of this stuff in order to implement on their own timeline. And that's the thing. It is an elephant. And how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah. One bite at a time. Yeah. Can't do it all at once. And no, I think that obviously a great evolution to be able to dive a little deeper into this topic and other related ones. And obviously, things are constantly evolving in all these businesses, especially a lot of our advisors whose businesses are growing quickly. That's what we want. We got that entrepreneurial mindset. So how do you ensure that an accountability chart stays relevant, effective, up to date as the team continues to grow, as things change and evolve at a business? Like, how often should they be revisiting it?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat on an as needed basis, but at the end of the day, it is a best practice. And honestly, we worked with an EOS implementer, which is basically like a coach for EOS, right? For a few years. And then we started self-implementation. And ironically enough, this question, it just brought me to a realization that we are not doing one of the components that we used to do with the coach. And so I'm actually glad you're asking this, man. It was a little bit of a
I might need to revise the question. No, I'm kidding.
no, this is great. This is great. And it's GWC, right?
Yeah.
And it's, do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity to do it? And I don't know if he used to do it every quarter. Maybe he just did it at the annual. At the end of the day, as you grow, right, seats will become too big, right? Or your position contract is too big, really. You're holding too many responsibility agreements, right? And so you might get it, like totally get it. I understand it. And then you might even want it. Like, yeah, I'm good. Like, I want it. I want this accountability. But then when you start looking, do I really have the capacity to do my best work? And so then you start thinking, so having the GWC, the get it, want it, capacity to do it, conversations on minimally once a year.
Yeah.
Ideally, probably quarterly might be overkill, but maybe it is a good check-in just quickly with your team once a quarter. We're going to have to find out what's EOS.
Yeah.
I'm curious now as we're talking about it, because there is an as needed too. You will realize that, hey, there's some slip. Maybe the work's not getting as done as good as they are, but I know they're wicked smart and they have the ability to do the work. And now all of a sudden you have the conversation and it's, nah, man, I'm just at capacity, right? It's just like too big. So sometimes that's where you got to peel responsibility agreements off.
Get those trading cards out.
Yeah, you got to peel them off and give them to somebody else. You got to reorganize the deck sometimes. Somebody else has to take over a certain even top management seat of managing and being accountable for a certain area to make room for somebody else to be able to take on a part of a responsibility that somebody else was previously owning, right? And so a good example is like early on in your business, right? When you're small, marketing, lead generation, business development, which we consider lead conversion, basically taking any people that are interested and converting them onto an advisor's calendar. Now, some of the lead generation could come from marketing, but other lead generation, business development might do on their own. They might do small group events. They might go to networking events. They might have centers of influence they're meeting with on a regular basis. And then you have the financial advisor that's converting them to become a client, right? Move their money over.
Yeah.
In a small business, you might be doing all three. You might be accountable for the marketing in your firm, accountable for business development. Usually those are bundled together when you're small. And then you might be also accountable for the closing of the client to become, and really, if you think about it, it's three closes, right? You got to close them to be interested, to actually fill out a card, show up for a seminar, show up for a webinar online, whatever it is. There's a close that marketing needs to do. Marketing needs to get them interested to actually engage and provide their information or show up, right? But then from there, business development has to convince them to get on the advisor's calendar. And then the advisor has to convince them to move over their assets, become a financial services client. So it's three different closes. A lot of small firms, it's all bundled together. It might be one person, might be the owner, right? Doing all three. And all of a sudden, though, as he grows, he might be like, you know what? I'm going to hire a marketing person. And so I'm going to now delegate out, or I'm going to hire a marketing agency. And I'm going to delegate that marketing lead generation responsibility. I'm going to get it off of me so I can focus on business development, being a rainmaker, and being a financial advisor, getting them to move over their assets, taking them through the holistic wealth management process. Then as things develop, he peeled off marketing. He might realize, hey, man, I love hunting. I'm business development all day long, but it's draining me, like working with all these clients and all the service and all the everything else. And I want to phase out of being a financial advisor and just being a rainmaker doing business development. feeding other financial advisors. So now that might unbundle, right? Where business development is separate from the financial advisor. Or some advisors are like, I love being an advisor. I hate prospecting and COIs and entertaining and shaking hands and kissing babies and speaking and stuff. I don't want to do that. So they might hire a business development person that takes over that responsibility. That's the evolution, and that's the beauty of being a financial advisor business owner, is you can focus on your strengths and what your unique ability is, what gives you energy and you're really good at, and you can peel off those responsibilities and put other people in place that maybe that's their unique ability, is doing the things that you're pretty good at, but it drains your energy. So now you can peel that off and keep building your team.
No, I love that because it speaks to what you said earlier. That's a benefit of an accountability chart versus an org chart. Like in an org chart, that advisor is going to probably keep owning all those things, where this kind of gives that flexibility to peel off business development, or the opposite, peel the other off and have clear accountability. Versus an org chart, they're going to be sitting there with all those. They might be delegating them, but then no one's accountable for it.
Oh, you just hit the nail on the head, Matt. Yeah.
So I know we're coming towards the end. Have we had situations, have you seen where maybe two roles have overlapping responsibilities on an accountability chart? And how does, I guess, an advisor / business owner go about handling that if there's two roles with overlapping responsibilities?
Oh, 100%. I'm going to go right back to the marketing, business development, financial services lane, right? Because we have three separate lanes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny, Matt, because there was always like this, for years, we ran it this way, is marketing was also accountable for business development. And then it was like, sometimes there'd be finger pointing. The advisor had a meeting, and then but then the client, then they said they were interested, but then they didn't show up for the next meeting. It's like marketing did their job, but then it's like the financial advisors keep calling them, get them back in. Like, whose job is that? And there is an overlap there. And unbundling marketing and business development made a lot of sense to us and really provided a ton of clarity of the difference of lead generation, lead conversion. And then also, like, depending on the advisor and what level they're at and what rung, to take a responsibility agreements underneath the business development lane and saying, you are now accountable and responsible for this. And so, like, that overlap in many firms, some people are like, oh yeah, the financial advisors are accountable for business development. And that's fine, but sometimes it's not just clear, right? It's finger pointing over, is it a marketing issue? Is it a business development issue? Is that the advisor's responsibility, or is it just marketing responsibility? And I think, where we grew as a firm to the next level is where we unbundled all that, made it completely transparent, then took all the responsibility agreements and made it clear who was accountable for what. And one of the things that, from an overlap standpoint, is the carrying forward on the financial advisor side. The financial advisor was always accountable, right, for building their own financial plans and responsible. When we started building out CSAs and paraplanners and bringing those people up the ranks and clearly reassigning those responsibilities, what it did is it shed those responsibilities from the advisor. And then the advisor would be like, my calendar's kind of open and I don't have enough leads, type of thing, like pointing at marketing. And then it was like, no. This is business development. This is where, listen, when you're not sitting with a client, selling them or servicing them, then that means you're doing a business development activity. And then putting that clear accountability in place and incentive compensation for them to understand that in order for them to grow, even in order for them to even be eligible to become a lead advisor and practicing partner, which we call like a senior wealth manager at a lead advisor level. So we have wealth managers at rung 3 and then senior wealth managers at rung 4. But they have business development accountabilities because we built into the structure. We found ourselves completely reliant on marketing for growth. And it was like marketing and referrals. That was it. And we're like, nah, man, let's delegate the easy stuff to kids out of college, client service associates, paraplanners, stuff that can be trainable, it's scalable. We can build processes, checklists, delegation, free up the financial advisors to now focus on business development. Now we do small group events. They're meeting with COIs. We're training on them how to get even better at referrals and taking people out for coffee, lunch, dinner, happy hour, all those activities. And so, yeah, so that overlap existed when it was all bundled. When we unbundled and delegated, we were able to go to a whole nother level of productivity due to that.
Thank you. I think that clears it up. I think everyone sounded very informative, hopefully very helpful. If you're not using this, hopefully you are interested. For our viewers or listeners today who are now thinking about making that shift to using an accountability chart or using the EOS model, where would you recommend that they start?
Of course, the teamwork movement would be an excellent place to start. And that is going to give you a great overview of the core tools. And listen, what's awesome too is the book Traction literally lays out the EOS operating system that we run on. What we've done is we've just built out all these additional tools, resources, e-learning modules, live training to complement the kind of structure of EOS, right? But at the end of the day, listen, EOS, eMyth has an operating system. Patrick Lencioni has an operating system called the Advantage. Bern Harnish used to be called Rockefeller Habits. Now it's called Scale Up. There is multiple different operating systems out there in the industry. EOS has done such an amazing job from a marketing standpoint because they just opened it all up. It's a total open platform. You can read the book Traction, and they literally teach you all the tools, all the concepts that they teach. And then what we've done is we've layered on specific to financial services, holistic wealth management, and we've customized and bolted all that stuff on to in essence, the operating system that like I said, whether it's EOS or Scale Up or eMyth
Right.
or Lencioni's, they're all almost the same. And they all really do originate from the Rockefeller Habits, which is so cool that like he created something so long ago that multiple companies have built empires off of his thinking and creating tools and structure around it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, as you said, we've taken kind of the EOS and some of these other best practices too and layered our stuff on. One of those partners, Bloom Growth. So if you're not using that software, like you said, you can read the book Traction, look into that stuff, start self-implementing if you think you can handle that. If not, we've got the resource here to help. Start with the teamwork movement, as Jason mentioned. We'll help get you on the right track. So, Jason, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was fun, Matt. Thanks, man.
Yeah, it was a blast. And for all of you, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out the comments below for the links. Visit these resources if you're with C2P and C2P Central. Whether you're with C2P or not, check out information on the next teamwork movement. We hope to see you there.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.